Since there are such a wide variety of eye mechanisms that can be built, and because movable eyes are usually what people want to learn about the most because they add such realism to their character, we decided to devote a whole segment on just building eye mechanisms. When building an eye mechanism, the first thing you'll have to decide is what you're going to use for the actual eyeball. You may be wondering what you can use for this. Well, basically, you can use anything round and fairly rigid, hollow or solid. Here are the things that I find most useful. Plain old ping pong balls, plastic wiffle balls in varying sizes, plastic shifter knobs, porcelain doorknobs, wooden doorknobs, bobbers, sink faucet balls, and my personal favorite, the roll-on balls off the top of deodorant and lip gloss bottles. These little things are perfect for making mechanical eyes because they come already mounted in their own little socket. With a little ingenuity and a little practice, you could learn how to make these common things look like realistic eyes, and we'll show you how a little later. The next decision you'll have to make is how you'll be mounting your eyes. Stationary eyes are simple because they can either be glued or molded in place. Movable eyes, whether single directional or all directional, are a little more involved because they require that the eye be mounted in a way that will allow it to pivot in either one or all directions. Now, if you remember on our design sheet, under the eye movement options, we had in parentheses external mount and internal mount. I'd like to explain to you now what those were. An exterior mounted eye is simply an eye that is held in place by something on its exterior. For example, if this wiffle ball were an eye and my fingers were the mount, this would be an exterior mounted eye. Exterior mounted eyes are simple to make, but they do have one drawback. They don't allow your eye to protrude very far, or else the external mounts will become exposed. This type of mount will not be the wisest mount for making a bug-eyed creature. An interior mounted eye, on the other hand, would look like this. And that is simply an eye that is held in place by something on its interior. Interior mounted eyes are a little more difficult to build because the mounting system has to be small enough to fit on the inside of the eye. The eye also must be hollow. The advantage of an interior mounted eye is that there is no exterior mount which will allow your eye to protrude farther, making that bug-eyed creature that you want. As for moving the eyes, movement is usually achieved by attaching a pole or a post to the back side of the eye. When the pole or post is moved, the eye corresponds to that movement. Once you've made these decisions, what you'll be making your eyes out of and how you'll be mounting them, you're ready to start building. Now, if you remember on our design sheet under eye movement options, we had listed up and down movement, left and right movement, and all direction movement. What we're going to do now is show you several mechanisms that you can build for moving the eyes in either one of these directions. The first movement we had listed was up and down movement. Let's look at a few eye mechanisms that you can build for moving your eyes in an up-down direction. An up-down or left-right moving eye can be something as simple as this, a piece of wire put through the center of a ping pong ball. When mounting eyes, you want to make sure the pivot you mount your eye to is in line with the center of the eye. For example, by spinning this ball on the wire, you can see there is no wobble. This wire is mounted perfectly through the center line of the ping pong ball. With this ping pong ball, on the other hand, if we spin it, you can see it wobble. This wire is mounted off-center of the center line of the ping pong ball. As you can see, it's very important, no matter how you'll be mounting your eye, that it must be mounted on center. The first eye mechanism we have here for moving the eyes in an up-down direction is a simple one made from 2 bobbers and 2 pieces of bar stock. The first thing we did was remove the inner workings on two bobbers. Next, we mounted them together at the raised circle. Next, we cut two pieces of bar stock and drilled two holes in them. One hole we drilled a clearance for a piece of 1024 threaded rod, and the other hole we drilled to accommodate the raised circles on the bobbers. Next, we glued short pieces of toilet lift rods onto the back of each bobber, and then we assembled it, as you can see, with two pieces of threaded rod. This will give you up-down motion. This next set of movable eyes are basically the same as the first, except ping pong balls were used for eyes instead of bobbers. And instead of attaching the ping pong balls together, we connected them to the bar stock using a 1024 bolt. This pair of up-down moving eyes are easy to build. This unit was made with a cheese slicer and two ping pong balls. First, we took a cheese slicer and removed the wire. Then we mounted the ping pong balls to the roller. Next, we attached a piece of 1024 threaded rod to the handle for a mount, and by means of a fishing line and a spring on the bottom, these eyes can be moved. This is another unit that's easy to build. I've simply taken a piece of threaded rod and locked a large washer in the middle of it using two nuts. Next, I drilled two pieces of bar stock and slipped them over the threaded rod. Then, I put a wooden knob on either end of the threaded rod. I've placed nylon washers between the wood balls and the bar stock to keep them moving freely. Cables can also be strung through holes drilled on the washer to allow you to move the eyes, and a spring can also be added to return the eyes to their original position. As you can see, this pair of movable eyes was constructed basically the same way the last pair was, except instead of mounting a washer onto a piece of threaded rod, we've mounted a small brass pulley. By pulling a piece of fishing line wrapped around the pulley, we can move the eyes. A spring will return the eyes to their original position. As you can see, this pair of eyes also has bent wire eyelids attached to it. Fishing line or cable attached to these wires can cause the eye to actually blink. This is an internal mounted eye. As you can see, there are no mounts outside of it. This is a simple mechanism to make, and it's simply made with two pieces of toilet lift rod, a piece of 1024 threaded rod, some 1024 nuts, and some nylon washers. This not only moves the eye in the up-down direction, but it can be turned to move the eye in the left-right direction. The last up-down moving eye we have is an interior mounted eye, and it is simply half of a ping pong ball mounted to a piece of bent wire. We've cut the end off a turkey skewer and glued it to the inside of the ping pong ball to use as a post. An eyelid wire can very easily be attached to this type of eye. As you can see, it can be very easy to build a mechanism to move the eyes in the up-down direction. Now let's look at a few eye mechanisms you can build to move the eyes left and right. The first mechanism we have for moving the eyes left and right is a simple one. As you can see, we drilled a hole through two ping pong balls, and through the hole we've put a 1024 bolt. Using nuts, we lock the bolt onto a piece of bar stock below. On the back of each ping pong ball, we glued a 1024 nut so that we could use a 1024 eye bolt as a post. To connect the post, we bent a piece of wire with a loop on each end and one in the middle, and we've attached it to the ends of the 1024 eye bolts. This mechanism was made from 2 shifter knobs and a few pieces of bar stock. A 1/4-20 bolt passes through the lower piece of bar stock, goes through the upper piece of bar stock, and enters the knob. The hole in the knob and the hole in the lower piece of bar stock are both tapped, but the hole in the upper piece of bar stock is not. That allows movement. We used a wire to connect the 2 pieces of bar stock that actually move the eyes. This is a handy method, and it can also be used with wooden knobs and also porcelain knobs. This is an interesting internal mount eye mechanism. It's a little more complicated than the others, but it's fairly easy to build. I left one of the eyes off so that you can see things more clearly. All I've done here is connected 2 1024 eye bolts to a piece of bar stock. Next, I placed a 1/4-20 bolt through the hole in the eye bolt and locked it in place with a 1/4-20 nut. I then placed a fender washer onto the bolt and lightly locked it in place with 2 1/4-20 nuts. Next, I drilled a hole in each of the washers and connected them with a piece of bent wire. The eye can simply be glued onto the outside of the washer. This little shifter knob mechanism is very simple to build. As you can see, the shifter knob is pivoting on a 1/4-20 bolt that's placed through a piece of bar stock. We've used a toilet lift rod as a post to control eye movement, and we've also added an eyelid wire to this. By bending wire and attaching it to the 1/4-20 bolt below, I've created a pivot point for the eyelid that is directly on center with the knob. We showed you these 2 mechanisms earlier for moving the eyes in the up-down direction. These can also be used to move the eyes left and right by simply turning them 90 degrees. Now that we've covered moving the eyes in the up and down and left and right direction, let's look at some mechanisms that you can build for moving the eyes in any direction. The first all-directional eye mechanism I have here is an external mount. It is simply a porcelain doorknob with an eye bolt post for moving it. The knob is seated in a washer and is held in place by a spring. The spring also serves to return the eye to its original position after it's been moved. The toilet lift rod on the bottom and the eye bolt on the back are only here to hold the spring in place. If this eye mechanism were actually being used in a mechanical head, the seat or the washer can be screwed or glued onto the base, and the spring can be attached someplace inside the head. The next all-directional eye mechanism we have here is really a neat one. All we have here is a ping pong ball with a 1024 nut hot glued onto the back. That way we can use a 1024 eye bolt as a post. Now this socket or housing around the ping pong ball, if you can believe this, is made from closet pole hangers. That's right, closet pole hangers. These are the actual things you have in your closet that hold the pole that you hang your clothes onto. It just so happens that the way they're cupped, they make a perfect socket for a ping pong ball. Now not all closet pole hangers are like this. Some of them are straight. So you might have to do a little searching to find this variety, but they do make a perfect socket for a ping pong ball. And if this flange is too large for you around here, Using a Dremel and a grinding bit, you can simply grind it off like this. The good thing about this type of socket is this whole thing only cost about $1. Another way you could use that closet pole hanger is as a seat for the eye. This mechanism is very similar to the one we showed you first, except we use a wooden knob for the eye and a toilet lift rod for the post. This next type of all-directional eye mechanism is simply a roll-on ball off the top of a roll-on deodorant bottle. This just happens to be my favorite type of eye socket because it's cheap, easy to build, and it works great. You could literally go down to your dime store and get hundreds of these, and they come in all different sizes. Now to build this, I simply screwed a screw eye into the back of the plastic ball. That will be the post. Next, I glued 2 tinner's rivets onto the socket, one on either side, and then I bent a piece of wire for an eyelid. This little type of eye socket works really well, it's handy, and it's fun to make. Here's another neat way that you can use a roll-on ball to make an interior mounted eye. What I've done here is I've cut away the wiffle ball that we're going to use for the eye so that you can see what's happening inside better. The first thing I did was glue a nut to the socket of the roll-on ball. Then I inserted a toilet lift rod. This will be used to mount the socket. Next, I drilled a hole in a plastic roll-on ball and put a piece of 1024 threaded rod through it. On the inside of the wiffle ball, I glued a T-nut, and then I screwed that onto the end of the threaded rod. The nuts you see on the end of the threaded rod are used to keep the center of the wiffle ball in line with the center of the roll-on ball. As you can see, this works very well. Here, we've connected 2 of these type of sockets together. You can see how versatile and helpful this could be. Now this next little unit is unique, but it works quite well. The eyes themselves are roll-on balls off the top of deodorant bottles. And what we've done on the back is we've put a screw eye in the back of each roll-on ball and connected them with a piece of bent wire and a couple 1024 bolts. By moving the wire, we can move our eyes. Now this outer white housing around each eye might not look familiar to you until I show you this. That's right, they're ice cream scoopers. What we've done is we've cut the end off 2 plastic ice cream scoopers and we mounted them together and modified them to fit our eyes in there. As you can see, it makes a perfect little eye blink mechanism. Now for those of you who would like to go with something a little more fancy, you might want to look into getting something like these. This is a rod end, and this is a spherical bearing. Now obviously by looking at these, you can see how helpful they can be in building mechanics. Obviously, these are a little more expensive than a roll-on ball off a deodorant bottle, but they'll last a lot longer too. You can also get these in a wide variety of sizes. To locate these, look in your yellow pages under bearings to find a company that handles these. They might even be able to send you a catalog of the products. Here is an all-directional eye mechanism that uses a small rod end as an internal mount or internal pivot. As you can see, there are many ways to build eye mechanisms that can move the eyes in any direction. Using roll-on balls is a perfect example of how using something for what it's not intended to be used for can give you fascinating results. Here's another example. Here's a baby rattle I picked up at a local department store for only 99 cents. Give you any ideas? Well, it did me. Here's one eye mechanism you can make out of it. And here's another. As you can see, you really can use just about anything to build mechanics. Now I'd like to show you a way that you can custom mold your own eye sockets. This is a two-part casting plastic called Alumalite. It's available from Berman Industries. We'll be giving you their address at the end of the program. This plastic is very helpful in pouring your own custom eye sockets. The first thing you need to do is cut a ring from PVC pipe that is larger than what you'll be using for your eye. Next, mount 2 rivets and 2 1024 screws into the plastic ring as shown here. Roll out a pad of clay and cut a hole in the center. Then push your ring onto the clay. Next, coat the ball with a good coating of Vaseline and press it into the hole. You have to make sure that the center of the rivets and the screws that you've mounted in the PVC ring are even with the center of the ping pong ball. Next, mix up a small batch of the casting plastic and pour it around the ping pong ball. Make sure that you don't fill the ring any farther than halfway up the ping pong ball. If you pour it farther than halfway, your ping pong ball will become locked in place. Once the plastic is hardened, pull it off the clay and pop the ping pong ball out. And this will give you a custom seat or a custom eye socket. These rivets, because they are mounted even with the center of the ping pong ball, are ideal for putting a piece of bent wire for an eyelid. The screws on the top and bottom can be used for mounting. The last thing I'd like to show you before we wrap this section up is how to make a realistic looking eye out of a ping pong ball. The first thing you need to do is to cut a perfect circle out of a ping pong ball. Next, with the small circle that you've cut out of the ping pong ball, paint the concave side to look like an eye. When the paint dries, glue the small circle back into the ping pong ball. Last, using 5-minute epoxy that you can get at your local hardware store, coat the eye to give it a glossy, glassy finish. As you can see, you can use this method of making eyes on anything hollow. For solid things, you can carve out a concave area using the Dremel, paint it, and then coat it with 5-minute clear epoxy. That about wraps it up for building eye mechanisms, so let's move on.